and there's ijma' among Muslims on this doctrine. Now, the most famous expression of this position is, of course, Al-Ghazali's work. The most famous expression is in Al-Ghazali's famous work, Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers. So this is the text. It's not very clear, but it's in this book is a refutation of certain philosophical views. Yeah. So Al-Ghazali is a theologian, Ash'ari theologian, and he wrote this book because he felt that theology was being threatened by philosophy, and he refuted certain doctrines. His relationship to philosophy is complicated, but I'm not going to go into it. This book is a refutation of philosophy. And this is the last paragraph or the last, the conclusion, let's call it, of the book. He says that, so he discusses 20 problems in this work, Tahafut al-Falasifa. And in the conclusion, he says, the philosophers are kuffar, they're unbelievers, because of 3 doctrines that they hold. So he discussed 20, but he said most of these doctrines are problematic, they're wrong, but they don't lead to kufr, to unbelief. Are contrary to Islam and to وَمُعْتَقِدُهُ الْأَنْبِيَاء, because for Al-Ghazali the prophets, not just the Prophet Muhammad, all prophets taught that the world is created. And he's talking about prophecy in general, so that includes the Quran, not just the Hadith. Okay, so for Al-Ghazali, this is to deny that the world is created amounts to denying the truth of the Quran, the teachings of the Quran, which of course is kufr. Okay. Ash'ari theologian. You had to affirm that the world is created with unshakable certainty. You have to be certain about this. You can't have any doubt about this view. Right, so the case I'm going to discuss in what follows is an exception. So this Ghazali's view is representative of theology in general. But there's one exception I'm aware of, and that's what I want to discuss. And it's actually quite a remarkable exception, and it's the only exception that I'm aware of with respect to this particular problem, the pre-eternity of the world. Actually, with respect to having doubt about any core theological doctrine. So anyway, it's the only exception I'm aware of. And this exception occurs in a work by the Ash'ari philosophical theologian Fakhruddin al-Razi. Next slide, please. Okay. You can zoom out a little bit. Okay. So al-Razi, okay, so just some very brief points about al-Razi. So al-Razi is, he's probably not as famous nowadays as al-Ghazali, but he is historically more important than al-Ghazali. And he died in the early 7th century of the Hijrah or 13th century CE. He wrote on philosophy, theology, fiqh, usul fiqh, tafsir, Quran exegesis, and other subjects. And he was hugely influential in these 4 subjects: philosophy, theology, tafsir, and usul fiqh. He's one of the most, but in that period, he was the most influential person in all 4 subjects. And he's still influential in all 4 subjects. And one interesting feature of al-Razi is that he wrote theological and philosophical works. Earlier thinkers wrote either philosophical or theological works. Al-Razi wrote both philosophical and theological works. And as I said, there were major debates, major points of conflict between these two traditions, these 2 intellectual traditions. So it was unusual for someone to write both philosophical and theological works at the same time. And if we look at his earlier theological works, it's clear that he took the theological view that the world was created out of nothing. He says that this view, this doctrine is certain, and we have evidence for this view from the Quran and from reason, from aql. And whoever, he actually says in his earlier theological works that whoever denies this view is immediately a kafir, is an unbeliever. Next slide, please. Okay. Right, okay. So this is Nihayat al-Uqul is one of his theological views, and he expresses this view there. Anyone who denies this, that the world is pre-eternal, is a kafir. Incidentally, before I continue, in a recent study in a recent book published by someone called Frank Griffel, it was argued that al-Razi accepted the philosophical view that the world was pre-eternal in his philosophical works. So as I said, al-Razi wrote philosophical and theological works. Griffel says that in his philosophical works, al-Razi accepts that the world is pre-eternal. However, this is not the case. Al-Razi denies rejects this doctrine in all his works, both philosophical and theological works. So this is his earlier view that whoever denies this doctrine, حدوث العالم, the creation of the world, is an unbeliever. We see a different position, however, in works dating to the last 3 years of his life, particularly in a work titled Al-Matalib Al-Aliyah. Next slide, please. Okay. So, Al-Matalib Al-Aliyah there's actually a newer edition. So I didn't have the image to put it on the slide. This is an unfinished work which he was writing before he died. He got ill and he stopped writing it, and then he died. And in this work, he has a whole chapter or whole part. You see, it's of actually not 8 parts, not 9. The 9th part is another work which was included in this book by mistake. There are 8 parts in this book, and one of them is focused on the problem of whether the world is created or eternal. So we see a very important shift in his position here. And this shift is connected to, just to clarify, this shift is about his view on whether the belief that the world is eternal amounts to kufr or not. Yeah. So to say that it's kufr is a very intolerant attitude. Yeah. So we see a change in his view. This change is actually the outcome of a more fundamental change in his method of investigation, is in his method of research, if you like. So when he describes his method of research, his research methodology, if you like, what he calls bahth, Ar-Razi criticizes 2 groups, or fariqan, as he calls them. And these groups are contemporaries of his. He criticizes them because of their because he considers them partisan and dogmatic. He considers them narrow-minded and dogmatic in their thinking. The first group is the philosophers, contemporary philosophers, the followers of Ibn Sina. And he says that these guys are only interested in defending the teachings of Ibn Sina, as if those teachings were orthodoxy, were taught in the Quran. So if you, according Ar-Razi says that the followers of Ibn Sina say that it's haram to disagree with Ibn Sina on anything, whether it's major or minor. يحرمون, so they consider it haram to do that, prohibited. And they forget that Ibn Sina was actually critical of his predecessors. So according to Ar-Razi, to be a good imitator of Ibn Sina, if you like, is to imitate his method of research, his critical method, yeah, not because he was critical of his predecessors. So this is how you should imitate him in his critical method of investigation, not by treating his views as if they're taught by, in the Quran. So this is one group of people that he criticizes. The second group are Ibn Sina's opponents, the theologians, who the followers of Al-Ghazali, who do nothing but refute the philosophers. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we have Ibn Sina and we have his followers, and then we have Al-Ghazali, and we have Al-Ghazali's followers, and these are two figures. These figures, I studied these figures in a previous publication, Ibn Ghaylan al-Balkhi and Sharaf al-Din al-Mas'udi. And the books they wrote are refutations of Ibn Sina. Just like the Tahafut, Al-Ghazali's Tahafut is refutation of philosophy, they wrote nothing but refutations. So Al-Razi says that, these guys are not doing proper research. They're just engaged in refutation. They just want to demolish. They don't want to build. So you have two groups. One of them just want to have a structure that they want to maintain without any criticism. And then you have another group who just want to demolish the structure. And they have nothing positive to offer to replace the structure with. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, this is a book I published a few years ago, in which I studied Sharaf al-Din al-Mas'udi, one of the followers of Al-Ghazali. Okay. And the book I focus on, Mabahith al-Shukuk, is a refutation of a work by Ibn Sina. So Al-Razi, Fakhruddin Al-Razi contrasts his own position with the views of these two groups, with the approaches of these two groups. And his method can be described as a thoroughgoing, a rigorous dialectical method which involves several steps. Yeah. So he says, I'm going to be critical, like the theologians. I'm going to be critical, not dogmatic like the philosophers, but I want to do this with the aim of establishing the truth, and not simply to refute the philosophers. Okay? So his method of investigation consists of several steps. And I'll do this briefly and without going into any complications. So he formulates a problem. So let's say let's take the problem of whether the world is created or eternal. That's a problem. Is the world eternal or is it created? Then he surveys earlier sources, so the works of the philosophers and the works of the theologians on this problem. He identifies the main positions and the main arguments. So he looks at Ibn Sina, the Ash'aris, and others, and summarizes the positions taken by these different people or groups on this problem, and the arguments that they use, and then he assesses these arguments, and he sometimes develops new arguments for these positions. And then when he assesses the arguments and the positions, ideally at the end, only one position should remain. Okay, so let's say, is the world created or eternal? And then you can then, if the world is created, then is it created out of nothing, or was there something before the world was created? So, for instance, when you let's say take some clay and create a statue out of it, you create a statue out of matter. So you have the matter, and then you give it form, and you make a statue. So, did God create the world like this? Was there some matter that God used to create the world? Or did he create the world out of nothing? So this is a further problem. You see, you start with the first problem, is the world created or not? And then there's another problem that follows. So And there are different positions now. We have three positions instead of two. So basically, Ar-Razi ideally should refute, should eliminate all positions except one. Okay? Now, if you do that, then you just affirm that position, that's the correct
Kami
position.
ucapkan terima kasih kepada Bapak Dekan untuk kehadiran pada pagi hari ini dan sambutannya.
Okay, so if but sometimes you can't eliminate all positions. Okay. So basically, what Ar-Razi does in this work in the Matalib is, and I'll try not to complicate things, when he discusses this, the problem of whether the world is created or not, he says, he takes a very unusual position. He says that he examines, first of all, the Quran and what the Quran says on the question. And then he looks at rational evidence, arguments that are not based on the Quran, and evaluates those arguments. So when discussing the Quran, he says, actually, in his view, the Quran says that the world is created, but it doesn't say explicitly that the world was created out of nothing, min al-adam. Okay? So that's not stated clearly in the Quran. And he then looks at the rational evidence, the rational arguments. And he concludes that the world is created, which is the earlier theological position. However, he says that there are still problems, unresolved problems. So, although he affirms that position, that the world is created out of nothing, he recognizes that he hasn't been able to address or answer all arguments, all the arguments of the philosophers who maintain that the world is eternal. Yeah? Normally, to affirm a doctrine, you have to have positive arguments for that doctrine, in support of that doctrine. And if you have to also answer all arguments for contrary positions. Yeah? So you have to refute your opponents, so to speak. In this work, in earlier works, he does that. But in this work, he admits that he is unable to do this fully and satisfactorily.
Siapa dulu tadi? Oh, yang dua di belakang tadi. Itu berdua. Ya, itu.
So what does he do? He says we have to affirm this doctrine that the world is created, not with certainty, but only as a probable belief. So it's not yaqeen, but he calls it al-aghlab, al-awla or al-akhlaq. He uses different expressions to say that this is a probable belief. This is the most probable belief, but it's not certain. Now, for earlier theologians, this is a completely unacceptable position to take. But Ar-Razi takes this position. Now, there's a bigger background to this. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the first book I published on Ar-Razi's ethical theory. And in that book, I published an edition of a short text by Fakhruddin Ar-Razi also, titled Risalat Dham Ladhat Dunya, the center of the pleasures of this world. And I argued that in that text, he expresses what I describe as moderate skepticism. So the view that often we can't reach yaqeen, certain knowledge, but we can have probable beliefs. This is a very important development in classical Islamic thought. And this, the view that he takes in the Matalib about whether the world is created or not, is an example of this attitude. That on some very important questions we can't reach certainty. We can't reach yaqeen or ilm. We can only reach probable beliefs. And this leads him to a remarkable expression of tolerance. Next slide, please. Yeah. So let me read this paragraph in full. This is in the conclusion to the discussion of whether the world is created or eternal in the Matalib. He says, now that those positions have been set out and investigated, and the points of strength and weakness of each has been identified, those who find themselves perplexed and confounded would say. So this is a strange way to introduce the concluding statement in a discussion. He says, I've investigated the different positions on this problem. I've assessed the points of strength and weakness in each position. Okay? So as I said, there are competing positions. World is created, world is eternal. I've assessed the points of strength and weakness in each. And then he talks about those who find themselves perplexed, في حيرة, أهل الحيرة والدهشة, I think he uses. It's a bit strange for someone to mention hayra here. And hayra here is a clear indication that he had doubts. He had some doubt about this whole problem and about his conclusions. Those proofs, he says, they say, those proofs are not so rigorous and conclusive as to eliminate all doubts, prevent and to excuse those who, this is it's a bit difficult to translate it actually. So those proofs, let me discuss the first bit. Those proofs, the proofs for, let's say, the creation of the world, for the proofs for the pre-eternity of the world, those proofs are not conclusive. Yes? They're not so rigorous and conclusive. So there is some doubt. And because they are not conclusive, they don't eliminate the excuse for others. So, in other words, if your proofs are conclusive, you can't excuse those who, if your proofs for a certain position are conclusive, then you can't find an excuse for those who reject this position. Okay? So and those proofs, because they're the mind, they put the mind at rest. So normally when the proofs are conclusive, that's when the mind is at rest. But he says that the mind is not at rest. His mind is not at rest because these proofs are not certain. They're not conclusive and decisive. Rather, there is still a degree of confusion in each one of those positions. Okay? This is quite clear. I don't need to explain this. There's still confusion, doubt, in other words. In each one, in each one of those positions that is talking about the position that the world is created in time, the position that the world is pre-eternal, and so forth. One who is merciful and generous, this is where the tolerance comes in. One who is merciful and generous would therefore be expected to excuse those who err in such intractable problems. Okay, so what do you do when you have doubts about your conclusions? You have to excuse those who take a contrary view. Okay, and the point about the prevent excuses to others. That's when you have no doubt about your own position. You will have no excuse for those who take a contrary position. But because you have doubt about your position, you can excuse those who take a contrary position. So you can't find an earlier theologian saying this, and we can contrast this with the position of Al-Ghazali, which I showed earlier, who says those who believe that the world is eternal are kuffar, they're unbelievers. He affirms the theological position that the world is created with certainty, and this is what the Quran teaches. We can be certain about that. Anyone who denies it is a kafir. Okay, and then merciful and generous, Ar-Rahim Al-Kareem, yeah, the one who is merciful and generous. Yeah, I mean, like no Muslim would say that. All Muslims would say that one has to be Rahim and Kareem. So you have to be merciful and generous, and you have to recognize that people, because people have reason, they, at least those who use their minds properly, believe what their minds lead them to believe. Yeah. So if you think about a certain problem and you reach a conclusion and you think in a sort of you believe that you've done your best in this thinking, then and you've reached a certain position, and someone else has done the same and reached a different position, then one should have the merciful and generous attitude of recognizing that that person has done their best, but reached a different position than mine, and one should acknowledge that this person, therefore, shouldn't be persecuted, let's say, because of the position or the conclusion they reached. Okay. So this is a very rare example of tolerance based on skepticism, on doubt. And as I said, when I use skepticism, I use it in a very specific sense to refer to moderate skepticism, not extreme skepticism. Razi is not an extreme skeptic. He's a moderate skepticism, and there is a clear expression here of the skepticism, because he talks about perplexity. He talks about confusion, yeah. As I said, there's a complicated background to all this, which I haven't really covered here, because this is not a philosophical paper. It's, yeah. Okay. So to conclude, I would say that one of the factors for the intolerance that we find in some areas of thought, whether it's in the Islamic context or non-Islamic context. I mean, this is not, intolerance is not simply it doesn't exist only in Muslim contexts, it exists in non-Muslim contexts, of course. One of the factors is the fact that the accounts of knowledge and belief that were dominant in the medieval period required knowledge to be certain. And the self-doubt that we find in Al-Razi's later career is a rare exception, but it can be inspiring, I think. Yeah, as I said, it's a rare exception in the medieval period, but nowadays there's a well-established, in the modern period, there's a well-established link between moderate skepticism and tolerance. Okay, let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's give him applause, please. Thank you, Professor Shihadeh, for this very interesting talk. You talk about a moderate skepticism, and you compare between fiqh and theology or usuluddin. When you say that in usuluddin we don't accept any doubt, because a little doubt in our belief will drive us to kufr or unbeliever, according to the theologian. But it's interesting when you say that when you have a little bit doubt, you tend to be tolerant. It's very interesting from this talk. If you have any question, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Please tell your name and your question. Sebentar.
Yes, okay. Before, thank you so much for the opportunity for the question, and allow me to introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Faiz Ahnaf Irshad. I'm from Arabic Literature 2023. So my question is, as we can see in the media social right now, there are so much hatred towards Islam, especially in Europe. So people often spreading the message and the videos of Muslim praying as a congregation in the public, and they caption them, the Muslim, like this is UK, London, or this is in typical place in Europe and not Saudi, something like that. So this type of content in media social is kind of forced and also legal in Europe. So my question, there are two questions that I have right now for Professor Ayman Shihadeh. Is this, or can we consider this type of people as extreme skeptics? And the second is, during your time as a professor in London, did you find this kind of intolerance or this kind of people that spread hatred to Islam is actually present there? And what is your thought about this?
Last bit.
Tolong diulangi pertanyaannya.
Oh, yeah.
Yang kedua.
The second is, during your time in London, did you find this kind of people actually exist, that hatred, who spread hatred toward Islam? And what is your thought about these kind of people? I think that's all for my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can answer.
Right, so this is indirectly related to my talk. Let me just make sure I got the question right, and please correct me if I didn't. So you're asking about hatred towards Islam, let's call it Islamophobia in the West, and whether this is a form of extremism. Yeah. Okay, and then did I encounter such people in my work? Yeah. Okay. Is this extreme skepticism? I don't think it is. No, I think it's a different attitude. most of the contemporary Islamophobia has less sophisticated, let's say, causes. It's skeptics are normally philosophers and educated. These guys are the opposite, it's anti-immigrant sentiment, also Christian fundamentalism. So in a way, it's dogmatism. It's extreme. It's religious extremism that is generating an atmosphere of hatred towards members of other religions. Racism, simple, basic racism. Yeah, and I think these are the causes and of course, do I interact with these people? Not in daily life, no. I mean, so I live in London, and London is a very diverse city. And of course, yeah, there are racists in London, but these sorts of attitudes are or exist more strongly in other parts of the UK. It's like if you go to the US, you go to Alabama or Texas, or like the countryside in Texas, you'll find far-right views, anti-Muslim sentiments. But if you go to, let's say, more educated parts of the US, you'll find that the attitudes are different. You'll find a lot of anti-Muslim hatred, but the attitude, it's sort of a different attitude. So it's mostly in areas that are less diverse and where the education, is average education level is lower, that you find these attitudes. So I encounter them, in the media mostly, sometimes, but rarely in daily life. Because I work at SOAS, and SOAS is a very diverse institution and very tolerant institution, we don't have, those views represented in strength at SOAS. I can't say that we don't have racists. Of course, there are racists everywhere. Okay, but they're sort of a bit quiet at SOAS because it's a very tolerant institution.
Other question, please. Yeah, please. 2 questions.
Okay, thank you for the chance. So my name is Triana Yunica. I'm an Arabic Literature undergraduate program. And this is my 5th semester. It's an honor to have opportunity to attend your lecture and asking for question. So I have been gradually researching the topics you have studied before, and I found several names that often appear in your research, like Al-Ghazali, Fakhruddin Razi, and kind of that. In the first place, I will ask about your motives, why these people have specific motives that interest you, but I thought you have mentioned it before. So my question is, I have translated before. Arazi's anti-theodicy shows theological rejection of Avicenna's claim that reason can understand God's justice. Isn't that intellectual humility that arises from skepticism towards reason a form of tolerance toward unsolvable mysteries? If so, is the historical narrative of premodern Islamic tolerance in the post-classical period built more on Sharia or rather on the epistemological uncertainty generated by the skepticism of Al-Razi and other critics of Avicenna. This, I thought, is your research from what Al-Razi anti-theodicy, right? Yeah, this is my question. This is my question, Professor. Thank you.
Okay, so
Basically, please make it shorter. Basically, you asked about Al-Razi anti-theodicy.
Yeah.
Is it a form of intolerance, something like that?
intolerance.
Yeah. The idea of Al-Razi anti-theodicy.
Is it intolerance?
Yeah.
Okay. So the tolerance and intolerance. No, you can disagree with someone without being intolerant. I suppose what is the question is what is tolerance? Yeah. So is it intellectual disagreement with others, or is it so when you disagree with someone? I think it's about what happens after you've disagreed with someone. So that we have disagreements everywhere, but what do you do with those who disagree with you? Can you continue to treat them in a let's say an accepting way? Can you accept this disagreement and treat others accordingly, or do you treat them as enemies? I think that's the point about tolerance. So Al-Razi, like on this particular question, the question that I discussed here, disagreed with others. He said, "This is the position I take, that the world is created, but I recognize that others have taken different positions, and that those positions, and I haven't been able to refute all those positions because I still have doubts, and therefore I have to excuse those who take contrary positions." So he doesn't call them kuffar. So Al-Ghazali does, what Al-Ghazali does, he rejects certain views, and then at the end of the book he says, therefore, those who take these views are kuffar. That's where the problem arises, because there's a judgment there, and there are consequences. And he says, if you actually go back to the slide, please, I think the first slide, the next, here. He says, the second line, كفرهم ووجوب القتل. No, if you could maybe, yes. ووجوب القتل لمن يعتقد. So what happens because they're not just kuffar, they're apostates, murtad. Yeah, they were born Muslims, and then they became, in Ghazali's views, kuffar. So that's ridda here, and what happens, strictly speaking, to the murtad, the apostate, it's qatl, it's execution. Now, did this happen in practice? Very rarely. This is a bit theoretical here. It sounds harsh, and if someone reads it out of context, will say, "Oh, look at those Muslims, were killing, philosophers and so forth." But in fact, this is a bit theoretical, and the practice is different. But it's still important that he says that. So there are two things here. There's intellectual disagreement, and there's a consequence. So when Al-Razi, going back to your question, Al-Razi disagrees with Ibn Sina on something like theodicy. Theodicy is a view, let's say, a theory concerning the problem of evil and the goodness of God. It's a big question, which I'm not going to into here. He disagrees with him intellectually, but he doesn't go on to say Ibn Sina is a kafir, and anyone who accepts Ibn Sina's views must be also deemed a kafir and be killed. So no, I don't think it's intolerance. I'm not saying Al-Razi is a very tolerant person. No, that's definitely not what I'm saying. But But intellectual disagreement is not by itself intolerance. Yeah, generally speaking.
Thank you. Another question? This? Yeah, please.
Okay. Assalamualaikum. My name is Nafi. I'm from Center for Religious and Cross-Cultural Studies from the other faculty. And like this is very interesting. I was wondering, what would Ar-Razi and Al-Ghazali think of the, let's say, modern young Muslims who
Of the what? The modern young.
What would Al-Ghazali and Ar-Razi think of modernized young Muslims
Okay.
who hold certain beliefs of God or of universe? Let's say that universe like is uncreated, and they
Is not created.
is not created, yes,
Okay.
and they hold that beliefs not because of they have think about it or read about the Islamic scholars or the Kalam. They didn't study Kalam, let's say,
Yeah.
but because of education, because they read like philosophy books or popular scientific books that we have now
Yeah.
today.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's an interesting question. Yeah. What would Ar-Razi say about that? I'm not sure what Ar-Razi would say. If I brought Ar-Razi in a time machine. I suppose. Sorry. I mean, this question really has more than one aspect to it. One aspect is popular theology, let's call it. Not sure theology, popular beliefs. If you look at even pre-modern, this is not a purely modern phenomenon. If you look at pre-modern theology, you'll see discussions of what they call Iman al-Awam, the beliefs of lay people, non-theologians, people who didn't really study Kalam, or sometimes are illiterate. And there's a lot and these people, I mean, can be influenced by all sorts of ideas. So, popular beliefs. So, we think of the history of the Islamic world as, Islam existed in certain regions. Let's say North Africa. Let's take North Africa. So when we think, we tend to think that everyone in North Africa in the last 10 centuries, for instance, was a Muslim and believed in, I don't know, Ash'ari theology. No, they didn't. There were some who did that, the educated people, but then the people in the villages, if you ask them about how the world was created, they'll probably, tell you that, give you some mythology that maybe, or they may tell you that God created the world, and if you ask them how God created the world, they probably describe a big person, big man, who, maybe, built something, like a house or something. So they will have a very, for theologians, would have a very crude understanding of theology. Or they may tell you that the world was, like in an egg laid by a big chicken, and, it hatched and the world came into being, some sort of mythology. And so that's, so popular beliefs often had different influences and were not aligned with I wouldn't call it official theology, with high theology, let's call it, with theology narrowly defined, with the learned tradition of theology. And that's why many theologians said that some theologians said that the Awam were unbelievers. Some theologians said that the Awam, you have to excuse the Awam because they're not educated, etc. So there's, anyway, I mean, now of course, your question is not about, Awam in the pre-modern sense, but the similarity is that the young Muslims that you're talking about, as you said, didn't study kalam. Yeah? So they got their beliefs from other sources. So that's the similarity. So I think the question is, what would a modern theologian say about this? I'm not a theologian, so I can't answer this question myself. But it's for there's a tradition of theology or dealing with this problem, you know, of those who didn't study kalam but have different beliefs from all sorts of other influences. What do we do about them? So, yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry I didn't give you an answer about what Al-Razi would say about this. He would probably say, yeah, let's be tolerant and try to educate them. This is not my answer, though. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe one last question, please. Yeah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Zaid Amar, and I'm from new undergraduate student in Universitas Gadjah Mada as an Arabic literature. And I have an honor to ask about you about this theme. My question is, why is Islam now the subject of fear, as you said about Islamophobia in many countries, and what role can critical thinking or skepticism play in fixing this image? Because I've seen this a lot of in the social media, why about the debating about Islam, the Muslim, and debate with the Christian in the Europe, and then they try to emphasize, try to Mada. Afan, about try to give an information about Islam, what is Islam, what is the truth of Islam, maybe like that. And the second question is, if great scholars of the past like Ar-Razi, as you said, were honest enough to admit that we're confused and not 100% certain about the deep religious questions, why are many Muslims today so curtain and quick to judge others on issues that are often trivial or superficial? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could you... Okay. Okay, thank you very much for these questions. So the causes of Islamophobia, is that the first question? Yeah. As I said earlier, there are a number of causes for it. It's a mixture of right-wing, far right, hostility towards people who look different and who think differently. So a far right, let's say, what they call nativist attitudes. So the view that Europeans or white people are supreme and should be put first, and that everyone else should come last. So that's racism, and there's also anti-immigrant sentiment in the West, and many immigrants unfortunately come from Muslim countries, for refugees and so forth. And what else? And then there are religious motives sometimes. People on the like fundamentalist Christians who view Islam as evil, and and therefore are hostile to it. So there are a combination of factors behind Islamophobia. And then the second question is, oh yeah, why? So Muslims, Muslim attitudes towards other religions. Is that the question, or?
Attitude toward other religion, that's your question? Why?
Muslims attack other Muslims. Okay. Yeah, I mean, every religion has, let's say, certain sections, let's call it, that are more less tolerant of others, of difference. Yeah, I mean, there are some schools of thought in Islam that are, sort of less tolerant of other Islamic schools of thought or non-Muslims, etc. So why these became influential at certain times and places, I think it's mainly because, or often, not mainly, often because of social and political factors. It's often a reaction to a political situation. There's some Muslim countries are, still suffer from the legacies of colonialism, and some Muslim lands are invaded, or you have war and conflict, etc. Mostly Western powers, getting involved in these countries, and this often leads to a reaction, and the reaction is often expressed in religious terms, and it's militant, and it's theologically intolerant of others. But often there are social and political reasons for these. Yeah, so that's I think one explanation.
Thank you very much for the question and for the response, the answer from Professor Shihadeh. And that's all today, our lecture on skepticism and tolerance. And thank you very much for your coming to the Faculty of Cultural Sciences. And thank you very much, especially to Professor Ayman Shihadeh for your lecture. Give a big applause to him.
As we come to the end of today's event, we would like to thank our speaker, moderator, guests, and participants for joining this event with great enthusiasm from the beginning until the end of this event. We will now present the token of appreciation to Professor Ayman. We will now present the token of appreciation to Professor Ayman, to be handed by Professor Soegondo. Okay, and please our media fellow to take a picture of this moment. Okay, we invite all the guests and participants to take a picture for the event. Thank you all for the cooperation. That concludes the Middle Eastern Cultural Studies International Public Lecture 2025. Thank you again for being part of this event. We hope today's event giving more knowledge about skepticism and tolerance. See you again in our next event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.